The first time Clyde Ford saw her, she was standing at the edge of the Millhaven market square like a storm front that had wandered in from the high plains and forgotten to move on. It was a Thursday, which was the only day the trading post town of Millhaven swelled to anything worth calling a crowd. Farmers rolled in from the outlying homesteads, trappers descended from the ridge country with bundled pelts, and the occasional traveling merchant set up canvas awnings over wagon beds piled with cloth, tools, dried goods, and whatever else might separate a working man from a few coins. The square itself was nothing grand packed dirt, a well at the center, a row of permanent stalls along the eastern side where the chandler, the grain merchant, and old Prute's dry goods shop stood shoulder to shoulder under weathered wooden signboards. The smell was hay and horse and wood smoke, and the sharp sweetness of cured leather. Clyde had driven his wagon in from the east, a rutted 2-hour journey from the Ford homestead, with his daughter Rosie sitting beside him on the bench and his list of needs tucked in his breast pocket. Flour, lamp oil, a new length of hemp rope, and if Prute had it, a replacement hinge for the smokehouse door. Simple things. The kind of errand that should take an hour and leave a man back on the road before midday. He was tying his draft horse to the post outside Prute's when he heard the silence before he saw the cause of it. A trading market does not go silent easily. There are too many people, too many transactions, too much life pressing in from all directions. But the square had gone quiet in the particular way. It goes quiet when something has alarmed a crowd, not all at once, but in a spreading ripple, conversations dropping away one by one as heads turned in the same direction. Urzoth Ironhide was standing at the mouth of the square where the main trail from the north came in, and she was taller than anyone around her by nearly a full head. She stood 6 feet and 3 inches of green-skinned, broad-shouldered woman in a fitted leather bodice the color of dark amber, laced up the front with black cord, the panels cut to follow the curve of her ribs and waist before flaring slightly at the hips. Her trousers were deep brown canvas, tucked into knee-high boots of rough-cut hide that had been stitched with sinew in a pattern along the outer seam. A short traveling cloak of stitched wolf pelts hung from her shoulders, pinned at the throat with a bone clasp, the hem barely reaching the small of her back. She carried a pack on one shoulder and nothing in her hands, which she held slightly open and slightly away from her body, a posture Clyde recognized as the deliberate, careful stance of someone who does not want to be mistaken for a threat. Her face was striking in the way that made you forget what you had been looking at before. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, amber eyes that caught what little winter light filtered through the cloud cover and held it. 2 small tusks rose from her lower jaw, smooth and pale ivory, and her black hair was pulled back from her face and braided in 3 tight ropes that fell over one shoulder. She was not young, maybe 28, maybe 30, the kind of age that has seen enough weather to make the features sit with authority, and she was not looking at anyone with either aggression or apology. She was scanning the market stalls with the focused, deliberate expression of someone who has a list in her head and intends to get through it. The crowd had other ideas. A man near the grain merchant's stall took a step back. A woman gathered her child by the shoulders and turned her away. 2 men near the well exchanged a look and moved their hands to the short axes hanging at their belts, not drawing, but touching, the instinct of men who had grown up hearing certain things about orcs and had never been given reason to unlearn them. Millhaven sat close enough to the old war country that the wounds of the orc-human border conflicts were still alive in the town's memory. Raids, 15 years gone, burned farmsteads, a treaty that nobody fully trusted. The older men in town had fought in those skirmishes and carried the scars, and the younger men had grown up on the stories. An orc woman walking into the market square on a Thursday morning was not something Millhaven's population was prepared to absorb without a reaction. Clyde watched all of this from outside Prute's door. He watched the stall vendors lean back. He watched a man named Garrett Buell, who ran the feed stall and had a loud voice and a short temper, straighten up and cross his arms with the deliberate posture of a man preparing to say something. And then he watched Urzoth Ironhide take 3 measured steps toward the nearest stall, the chandler's, and he understood in that moment that she was not going to make this easy for herself, which meant she was either very brave or very desperate, and possibly both. Rosie tugged his sleeve. Clyde looked down at his daughter. She was 5 years old, with his late wife's dark eyes and her own particular brand of absolute fearlessness that had been giving him gray hairs since she learned to walk. She was staring at the orc woman with the wide, unfiltered curiosity of a child who has not yet absorbed the world's instructions about what to fear. "Papa," Rosie said, in her carrying voice that he could never convince her to moderate, "she is very tall." "She is," Clyde agreed. "Is she a person?" "Yes," he said, "she is." Rosie seemed satisfied with this and went back to staring. Garrett Buell had made his decision. He stepped out from behind his feed stall and planted himself in the open space between the orc woman and the chandlers. He was a broad man, shorter than Urzoth by 6 inches, but he had the particular kind of physical confidence that comes from never having been told no in a way that stuck. "We do not serve your kind here," Garrett said. His voice carried. He had meant it too. Urzoth stopped walking. She did not flinch. She looked at Garrett with those amber eyes and said, in a voice that was lower and more even than his, "I have coin. I need supplies. I am passing through." "I did not ask about your coin," Garrett said. "I am not asking for charity," she said. "I am asking you to turn around," Garrett said, "before this gets complicated." Several people in the crowd made sounds of agreement. Clyde watched the 2 men who had touched their axes move slightly forward. He watched Urzoth's shoulders settle, not into aggression, but into a particular kind of stillness that he recognized. The stillness of a person who is calculating whether a fight is worth having. He did not think it over for long. He was not, by nature, a man who thought things over for long when something was obviously wrong in front of him. He finished tying his horse, told Rosie to stay on the wagon bench, and walked across the square. He was not a particularly large man. Clyde Ford stood 5 feet 10 inches, lean and ropey with the muscle that comes from farming hard land without much help, with dark blonde hair that needed cutting, and the kind of sun-weathered face that belonged to a man in his early 30s who spent most of his daylight hours outdoors. He was wearing a canvas work coat, heavy trousers, and boots that had been resoled twice. He was not impressive to look at. But he walked between Garrett Buell and Urzoth Ironhide with the calm and deliberate pace of a man who has already decided what he is doing and does not plan to announce it. He stopped with his back half-turned to Garrett and looked up at Urzoth. "I know where the chandler keeps the good stock," he said. "The cheap stuff is up front. What do you need?" Urzoth stared at him. Her amber eyes moved from his face to the crowd behind him and back. "You do not have to do this," she said, quietly enough that Garrett could not easily hear. "I know," Clyde said. "What do you need?" There was a pause that lasted 3 heartbeats. Something shifted in her expression, not softening, not yet, but a careful recalculation. "Lamp oil," she said. "Salt, rope, if they have dried venison." "Same list as me," he said. "Come on." Garrett Buell sputtered behind them. "Ford, you are going to make trouble for yourself." Clyde glanced back. "Garrett, I have been making trouble for myself since before you moved here. I will survive it." He held the chandler's door open. Urzoth Ironhide walked through it with her chin up and her pack held to her side, and the door swung shut behind them both. Inside, old Marcus the chandler looked like he wanted to be somewhere else, but he was a practical man, and when Clyde put coins on the counter and asked for lamp oil, Marcus poured it without commenting on his companion. The transaction took 10 minutes. It was not comfortable, but it was completed. When they came back outside, the crowd had not dispersed. People were watching. Garrett Buell was still standing in roughly the same spot, and he had been joined by 2 other men whose names Clyde knew, both of whom were looking at him with an expression that he had seen before and did not particularly fear. Rosie had not stayed on the wagon bench. She had climbed down, which she was not supposed to do unassisted, But that had never stopped her, and she had walked directly across the square, because she was 5 years old and the idea of waiting somewhere was conceptually difficult for her, and she was now standing approximately 4 feet in front of Urzoth Ironhide, looking straight up. Urzoth had stopped walking. She was looking down at the child with an expression that Clyde could not immediately read, something between surprised and uncertain, which were not expressions he had expected to see on a face that had handled Garrett Buell without blinking. "Rosie," Clyde said, in his warning voice. Rosie ignored him because she always ignored that particular voice. She tipped her head further back and said very sincerely, "You are the tallest person I have ever seen. Do you have to duck to go through doors?" The silence stretched. And then Urzoth Ironhide did something that made the watching crowd go absolutely still. She bent her knees slowly, deliberately, until she was crouched down to the child's eye level. It brought her face to within a foot of Rosie's, and the two of them regarded each other with equal seriousness. "Most doors," Urzoth said. Her voice at this register was almost gentle. "The ones on the frontier are worse than the ones in town." "We have a big door," Rosie said gravely. "Papa made it wide because he dropped a wardrobe trying to get it through a small one, and he said words I am not allowed to repeat." Something moved at the corner of Urzoth's mouth. It was not quite a smile, but it was the cousin of one. "That sounds like an important door," she said. "It is," Rosie agreed. She held out her hand with the solemnity of someone conducting official business. "I am Rosie Ford. My papa is Clyde. He said you are a person." Urzoth looked at the small, outstretched hand. She looked at it for a moment that carried a weight Clyde did not fully understand yet. Then she reached out and enclosed Rosie's fingers in hers, carefully, the way you hold something you are afraid of breaking, and shook once. "I am Urzoth Ironhide," she said. "That is a good name," Rosie said with absolute authority. The crowd was watching. Some of them looked angry. Some of them looked merely baffled. One or two of them, Clyde thought, looked like they were trying to remember what they had decided to feel about this moment and were having difficulty. Garrett Buell looked like he had bitten into an apple and found it was not an apple. Clyde crouched down beside his daughter and met Urzoth's eyes across the few feet of open space between them. "Are you passing through or staying in the area?" he asked. "Passing through," Urzoth said. She rose slowly back to her full height, and Rosie craned her neck to watch the process as if it were a natural phenomenon. "I have business at the Saddler's Creek settlement, another half-day's ride north." Clyde nodded. He picked Rosie up and settled her on his hip, which she tolerated because she was still watching Urzoth. "The North Trail is rough this time of year," he said. "Ice on the creek crossing. You have a horse." "I have boots," Urzoth said without emphasis. He looked at her. She was watching him with the same careful, measuring steadiness she had used since they walked out of the Chandlers. It was not unfriendly. It was the look of someone who does not know yet what to do with kindness because they have not encountered much of it recently. "I have room on the wagon as far as the Fork Road," he said. "It would save you 2 hours of walking." She studied him. "Why?" "Because it is cold," he said simply, "and it makes no sense to walk when there is a wagon." She looked at Rosie. Rosie looked back at her with an expression of complete openness that 5-year-olds have and adults spend years learning to undo. "All right," Urzoth said, after a moment that felt longer than it was. They walked to the wagon together, which gave the Millhaven market square something to talk about for weeks. Clyde loaded his supplies, and Urzoth set her pack in the wagon bed and climbed up beside Rosie on the bench as if she had been offered a seat and intended to use it with dignity. She had to sit slightly sideways to accommodate her height. Rosie immediately scooted closer to her, because Rosie had no concept of appropriate distance from strangers, only appropriate distance from things that were obviously dangerous, and Urzoth did not qualify. Clyde climbed up on the other side of his daughter, gathered the reins, and clicked his tongue at the horse. The wagon rolled forward, and 20 people watched them leave the Millhaven market square, and almost every one of them was going to have an opinion about it by nightfall. The trail north from Millhaven cut through open scrub country for the first mile before entering the edge of the timber, and the world became quieter and colder, and much prettier in the way that wilderness is pretty when you are not in it alone and afraid. The sky was the pale gray of an iron skillet, and the bare trees threw their arms up against it like dark ink. The horse's breath came in clouds. Rosie talked for most of the first mile. She explained in considerable detail the situation of their farm, the number of chickens, the names of the chickens, the scandal of one chicken who had escaped 3 times and was still at large, the smokehouse that needed its hinge fixed, and the fact that the hinge needed fixing because her father had leaned on the door to look at something interesting in the field and had come close to pulling the whole frame off. Urzoth listened. She did not perform listening, the way some adults do when a child talks, making sounds at intervals and looking elsewhere. She actually listened, her amber eyes on Rosie's face, occasionally asking a question that was specific enough to prove she had heard the last thing said. Clyde drove the horse and watched all of this from the corner of his eye and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. About 2 miles from town, when the scrub had fully given way to timber and the trail narrowed, Rosie ran out of conversational fuel and fell asleep in the particular sudden way that children do, tipping sideways against Urzoth's arm as if she had been switched off. Urzoth looked down at the child's weight against her side. Something passed across her face that was too complex for Clyde to name, something tender and raw and quickly covered, the way you cover a fire when the wind picks up. "She can lean," Clyde said quietly. "I know," Urzoth said. She shifted her arm slightly so Rosie was more fully supported. "She does not seem to have asked for permission." "She never does," he said. "She gets that from her mother." A pause. The wagon creaked. The horse's hooves fell soft on the frozen mud. "Her mother is not with you," Urzoth said. "It was not a question." "No," Clyde said. 2 years gone, the winter fever." Urzoth was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I am sorry." "Thank you," he said. And then, because she had offered something real and he felt it warranted the same, "Are you traveling alone?" "Yes," she said. "From far?" She considered the question. "From the South Range. I had a settlement there. Among my people." She paused. "It is no longer a settlement." He did not ask why. The phrasing was deliberate, and the space it left said more than most explanations would have. He understood that there were things she was not going to tell him on a 2-hour wagon ride on a cold morning, and he did not feel entitled to them. "The Saddler's Creek settlement," he said instead. "You have family there." "An acquaintance," she said. "A trader who owes me a debt." "Merton Glace." She looked at him. "You know him." "Everyone in the Fork country knows Merton Glace," Clyde said. "He is either the most honest trader on the Northern Trail or the most skillful liar, and the argument has not been settled." The corner of her mouth moved again. "He owes me 12 silver and a month's worth of dried goods," she said. "The debt is from 3 years ago." "That sounds like Merton," Clyde said. They talked like this, careful and real, neither one of them reaching for more than what was offered, for the next mile. When they reached the Fork Road, the junction where his trail turned east toward the Ford homestead and hers continued north, he pulled the horse to a stop and looked at the sky and felt something he had not expected to feel about a woman he had known for less than 3 hours. He did not want to leave her standing at a crossroads in the cold. "The creek crossing is going to be bad," he said. "There was a hard freeze 3 nights ago. The ice will look solid and it will not be." "I have crossed ice before," she said. "I do not doubt it," he said. "But it is still another 4 hours of walking from here, and the light goes early this time of year." She was looking at the fork in the road. The north trail disappeared into the timber and looked exactly as uninviting as it was. "I have a barn," Clyde said. "It is warm and dry and there is room. You could continue to Saddler's Creek in the morning with the light." She turned and looked at him. "You are offering me shelter." "I am," he said. "Why?" She asked again, and it was the same question she had asked in the market, and it carried the same weight, the weight of someone who has learned to be suspicious of offered things, because offered things often come with unspoken conditions. He thought about how to answer it honestly. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said. And because Rosie is going to wake up very soon and ask you 14 questions, and it would be a shame to interrupt that." She looked at his daughter, still sleeping against her arm with her mouth slightly open and her dark hair across her face, and whatever armor she was wearing slipped a fraction. "All right," she said. The Ford homestead sat at the edge of a cleared field that had been pulled from the timber by hand over 3 years of relentless work. A log house, 2 rooms with a sleeping loft, the walls packed with clay between the logs and a stone chimney that drew well. A barn that was newer than the house and in better condition, because Clyde had the farming philosophy that the animals needed shelter before the farmer did, which was not practical, but was the kind of impractical principle he held onto. A smokehouse with its broken hinge. A root cellar. A water pump that froze in hard winter and needed to be thawed with hot water poured down the pipe, which was one of the more annoying chores on a cold morning. He pulled the wagon into the yard and Rosie woke up the instant the wheels stopped rolling, as if she had been waiting for the signal. She looked up at Urzoth with fresh alertness. "Are you coming inside?" she demanded. "The barn," Urzoth said. "Why the barn?" Rosie said. "Rosie," Clyde said. "There is a bed in the loft," Rosie said, ignoring him with the efficiency of long practice. "It is where guests sleep. We had a guest one time, a man called Uncle Harrow, but he is not really my uncle. He slept in the loft." Urzoth looked at Clyde over Rosie's head. He made a small gesture that said he was not going to pretend Rosie was wrong because she was not. "The loft would be warmer," he said, "but the barn is there and it is your choice." Urzoth looked at the house. Then she said, "The loft." He built the fire up while she set her pack by the ladder. Rosie appointed herself guide and led Urzoth through an exhaustive tour of the downstairs, including the kitchen corner, the table that wobbled on one leg and was held level by a folded cloth under the short one, the window with the broken latch that rattled in north wind, and the chicken that had not escaped but was currently living inside because she had found it in the dooryard looking aggrieved in the cold and had let it in, which her father did not know about. Clyde found the chicken sitting on the woodpile. He looked at it. It looked at him with the composure of a creature that has decided where it lives and dares anyone to contest it. He looked at Urzoth, who was looking at the chicken with an expression of pure, startled amusement that broke through her careful composure so suddenly that it changed the whole register of her face. And he realized, in that moment, that she was genuinely beautiful in a way that hit him somewhere between the ribs and did not immediately leave. He put the chicken outside. He made dinner. It was the plainest meal. He knew how to make salt pork and dried beans and cornbread, which was the kind of food that tastes like the best thing you have ever eaten when you are cold and have been walking all day, and like an apology in any other context. He set 3 plates. Urzoth sat at the table across from Rosie and ate with the focused, appreciative attention of someone who has not eaten a hot meal in several days, and she said so, which Rosie took as a personal compliment to her father. After dinner, Rosie was put to bed in her curtained corner of the sleeping loft. There was a partition curtain that gave Clyde and Rosie their separate spaces, and she requested, with great specificity, that Urzoth be the one to pull the curtain across, because she wanted to say good night. Urzoth climbed the loft ladder with careful economy, minding her head on the beam, and Clyde heard his daughter say good night and then say, at full conversational volume, "I am glad Papa made you stay. He does not usually let people stay. He is lonesome, but he does not say so." There was a pause. Then Urzoth's voice, very quiet. "I understand that feeling." And then the curtain rings on the rod and quiet. Clyde was sitting at the table with a mug of cider when she came back down the ladder. She sat across from him, not close, but not with the wary distance of the market square. She had unlaced her traveling cloak and set it over her pack, and in the firelight she looked not softer exactly but less armored. The leather bodice laced across her ribs was worn at the edges in the way that clothing gets when it is good and has been lived in hard, and the firelight turned her green skin to something richer, the color of deep pine in afternoon light. "She is remarkable," Urzoth said of Rosie. "She is terrifying," Clyde said, "in the best possible way." Her mother must have been extraordinary. She was. He turned the mug in his hands. Her name was Ellen. She was patient and funny, and she made everything better than it was, which is a difficult skill. He paused. I have not talked about her to many people. You do not have to, Urzoth said. I know, he said, because she had said the same to him on the trail and he felt it deserved returning. What happened to your settlement, if you want to say? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she would not. Then she said there was a disagreement with our clan elder about the treaty. He believed we should push back against the border arrangement, take back the eastern range. I believed we should not. She looked at the fire. When an orc woman argues with a clan elder, the argument generally ends in one way. He forced you out. He gave me a choice, she said. Go or be bound and handed over to the border garrison as a gesture of good faith. She said these last words the way you say something that tastes like copper. I went. That was not mercy, Clyde said. That was just a slower cruelty. She looked at him with something sharpening in her amber eyes, not wariness, but attention, as if she was recalibrating something. Most humans would say I deserved it, she said, or that I should be grateful he let me walk. Most humans have not met someone who walked away from everything they had, he said. It is easy to have opinions when you are not the one walking. The fire popped. The wind picked up outside and moved against the house in the way that winter wind does, looking for gaps. Why are you kind to me? She asked. Not the same question as before, not the transactional why of someone expecting a cost to be named. This was something closer to the bone. He thought about it. I watched a crowd prepare to hurt someone for walking into a market, he said. And the someone they were preparing to hurt was minding her own business and asking for lamp oil. There was not a complicated moral question involved. He looked at her. Also, Rosie trusted you in about 30 seconds, and I trust her judgment considerably more than I trust Garrett Buell's. She was quiet. Then almost to herself, the little one, when she held her hand out. What? She shook her head slowly. I have not had anyone offer me their hand, she said, with nothing behind it in a very long time. He did not have a response to that. That was not too large for a first evening. So he said, you are welcome here as long as you need. And he meant it with a simplicity that she could hear. She looked at him for a moment longer than was casual, and then she looked at the fire, and they sat in a companionable quiet for a time that neither of them measured, and the house settled around them in the cold. She slept in the loft. He slept in his curtained section of it, as he always did, with the wood stove banked and the house holding its warmth against the night. He lay awake for a while listening to the wind and thinking about amber eyes and the way a woman's face can change when she sees something that surprises her into joy. In the morning she was awake before him. He came down the ladder to find the fire already built up and a pot of water heating on the stove, and Urzoth standing at the east window watching the gray light come in over the frost-whitened field. You did not have to do that, he said, meaning the fire. I know, she said, which was becoming their particular shorthand. Rosie descended the ladder at maximum speed and volume, and demanded to know what was for breakfast, and whether Urzoth was still there, and had Urzoth ever seen a frozen pump thaw, because that was going to happen this morning and it was interesting. It was, in fact, a frozen pump morning, and Urzoth carried the pot of hot water out to the pump in the yard with Rosie providing supervision. And the pump gave way with a great groaning release of water that made Rosie yell with satisfaction. Urzoth caught the first rush of water in the bucket with the practiced ease of someone who has done this kind of work, and Clyde, watching from the doorway with his coat half on, felt something warm and domestic move through him that he had not felt in 2 years. Over breakfast oat porridge, which was honest if not elegant, Rosie announced that Urzoth should not go to Saddler's Creek, because she was good at pumps, and there were other things that needed fixing. There is a fence post in the east field that is lining, Rosie said. Papa keeps meaning to fix it and then other things happen. Rosie, Clyde said. It is true, Rosie said. It is true, he agreed. But that does not mean we are going to make our guest our farmhand. Urzoth was looking at him with that expression again, the one that was recalibrating. "I could look at the fence post," she said. "You do not need to earn your stay," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to." There was a difference in those statements that both of them felt, and Clyde set down his spoon and looked at her across the table and thought that he was in some early and gentle kind of trouble, and that he was not sure he minded. She went to the fence post. He went with her, because two people move a leaning post faster than one, and Rosie came too in her coat and her ridiculous hat with the ear flaps, carrying a small hammer that was not going to be useful but which she was convinced would be. The east field was hard frozen, and the sky had lifted to a cleaner gray, and their breath made three separate clouds as they walked out across the crunching grass. The post was leaning at a significant angle, not just cosmetically, but structurally, the kind of lean that means the next strong wind turns it into a projectile and takes 20 feet of fencing with it. Urzoth assessed it the way she assessed everything, with quiet focus. She put her hands on the post and found the angle. "The base has rotted," she said. "You need to pack stone around it or the new setting will just sink again." "There is a pile of field stone by the barn," Clyde said. They packed the post together, working with the rhythm that comes when two capable people discover they have compatible instincts for physical work, not needing to talk much, reading the task and each other, handing tools and stones in the right order without being asked. Rosie handed rocks when they were small enough and supervised when they were not, and provided a running commentary on the structural integrity of all the other fence posts that she could see from where she stood. When the post was set and packed and solid, Urzoth straightened and rolled her shoulders, and Clyde found himself briefly and thoroughly distracted by the way the morning light fell across the line of her jaw. He looked at the fence post instead. "Good work," he said. "You are a competent farmer," she said, which was not a conventional compliment but was clearly meant as one. "I am an adequate farmer," he said. "Ellen was the competent one. I am learning." She nodded, not with pity but with understanding. There is a difference between those things. He almost said, "Stay another day." Instead he said, "The trail to Saddler's Creek will be better traveled in the afternoon than the morning when the ice has had some sun." She looked at the field. The frozen grass caught the light. Somewhere in the tree line, a winter bird called once and stopped. "That is true," she said. She stayed the day. She fixed the hinge on the smokehouse, which required a specific kind of patience with a bent pin that was nearly impossible to align, and she aligned it on the second try. She helped him stack the remaining firewood more efficiently against the barn wall, out of the wind path that the north corner created. She sat with Rosie in the afternoon while he worked on the accounts he kept in a small ledger: seed costs, harvest numbers, debts and credits, and he could hear Rosie telling her things, some true and some invented, and Urzoth's low voice asking questions that were always about the right things. At one point, sitting at the table with his pen, he looked up and saw them through the window: Rosie outside in the yard, demonstrating something that involved running in a circle, and Urzoth standing in the thin winter sun watching with her arms crossed and that almost smile on her face. And the scene had a rightness to it that made his chest do something complicated. That evening he made a better dinner: roasted salt pork with root vegetables that had been in the cold cellar since autumn, and the good bread that he made when he was feeling that it was worth the effort, which he rarely was. She ate with the same appreciation as the night before. Rosie fell asleep at the table and had to be carried up to the loft, which Clyde did while Urzoth cleared the plates with the quiet efficiency of someone who is doing a thing because it is simply there to be done. He came down from putting Rosie to bed to find Urzoth standing in the middle of the room, not quite settled, her traveling cloak in her hands. "I should go in the morning," she said. "Merton Glace will not wait beyond the week." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you for the market. For the wagon, for all of this." "Urzoth," he said, and her name in his mouth was the first time he had used it directly to her, and both of them noticed. "You are welcome back. If you need somewhere to be after Saddler's Creek." She was very still. "You mean that?" "I do." She studied his face for a long time with the careful thoroughness of someone who has learned to read honesty and lies in faces the way a tracker reads ground sign. Then she said slowly, "I may take you up on that. I will leave the lamp on," he said, "in the window so you can find the place in the dark." She nodded once, and then she went up the ladder and he sat at the table for a while listening to the house and the wind, feeling the specific, bittersweet ache of a person who knows they are beginning to want something and are not yet sure if they are allowed to. She left in the morning before he was fully awake, which he had expected. He came down to a house that was very slightly emptier than it had been, the way a room is after a good fire goes out, still warm but aware of itself. The fire was built up. There was a small piece of bone on the table, carved smooth in the shape of a fish, which was the kind of small trade carving that orc craftspeople made on the trail. He picked it up. It was warm from sitting near the fire. Rosie found it at breakfast and demanded to know what it was and where it had come from. "Urzoth left it," he said. Rosie held it with the gravity of someone receiving an official document. "She is going to come back," she announced. "I think so too," Clyde said. He was right. She was back in 3 weeks. She appeared at the end of the track to the homestead on a gray afternoon when Clyde was splitting wood in the yard, and he saw her before she reached the gate, that height, that stride, the wolf pelt cloak moving at her shoulders. He straightened with the axe in his hand and watched her come, and he did not trust himself to examine what he was feeling until she was close enough to see her face, which was not happy, exactly, not that open, but something that might have been resolute. "Merton paid the debt," she said when she reached the gate. "Most of it." "And you came back," he said. "I said I might," she said. "You did." He set the axe down. "Do you have somewhere to be after this?" A pause. "No," she said. "Then come in," he said. "I was going to start on dinner when the wood was done." She came in. It was not discussed formally. There was no single conversation in which they decided the thing, because in the Ford homestead that winter things happened by accretion rather than declaration. She stayed one night, and then she was there to help with the morning chores, and one day of help became a week, and a week became the understanding that she was staying, and the understanding that she was staying became the slow, daily revelation of 2 people learning each other. She slept in the loft, and he slept in his curtained section, and Rosie slept in hers, and this arrangement was proper and correct, and Clyde was not entirely at peace with how much he was aware of her in the dark. She was not easy to know. She was not closed, exactly. She was generous with her attention, with her capability, with the small careful observations she offered when they were working together. But she had the particular kind of reserve that comes from having been hurt in ways you are not ready to name yet. She did not talk about the settlement without prompting. She did not talk about the clan elder. She did not talk about the years between the war and now, the ways she had moved through a world that did not want her to be in it. What she did was show up every day and do the work. She repaired things with a skill that went beyond competence into genuine craft. The broken window latch that had rattled in north wind, she fixed by reshaping the iron herself over the forge in the barn. The root cellar door that had swelled in the damp and would not close fully, she planed down with a draw knife borrowed from the tool wall until it seated cleanly. She knew how to read weather by the color of clouds and the behavior of the horse and the direction of the wind at specific times of day, and she was right about it more often than not, and they moved chores forward or back based on what she read in the sky. Rosie adored her with a completeness that was almost aggressive. She invented reasons to be near Urzoth, dragged her to see the chickens, demanded she examine everything of interest in the barn and the field and the tree line, and told her things that she had never told Clyde because they were specifically things that children need to tell someone who is not their parent. Urzoth received all of this without ever being overwhelmed and without ever condescending, and she had the quality, rare in adults, of taking what a child said seriously. Clyde watched all of this and was careful with himself. He had been careful with himself for 2 years, and it had become a habit, and he did not immediately recognize when it started to feel like a loss. The change came in small increments. The first time she laughed, really laughed, not the near smile, but actual helpless laughter, was when Rosie convinced both of them to help her build a fort out of fence rails and old sacking in the barn. And the construction collapsed at the worst possible moment and covered all three of them in loose hay. Urzoth sat in the hay pile and laughed with her whole body, leaning back and entirely unguarded, and Clyde sat across from her in the same hay pile and felt his careful habits crack slightly at the seams. The first time she touched him was not romantic, or at least it did not begin as romantic. He had caught his hand on a nail pulling boards from an old wall, a deep gouge across his palm, and she had said, "Let me," and taken his hand in both of hers with a grip that was firm and careful at once, and cleaned the wound and bound it with strips of cloth from her pack, and her hands on his were so steady and warm that he forgot to be in pain for most of the process. "Thank you," he said when she tied off the bandage. "You are welcome," she said. Her hands were still loosely around his wrist. She seemed to become aware of this at the same moment he did, and she released his hand and stepped back, and they both found something else to look at, and neither of them mentioned it. But later that evening, sitting by the fire with the work of the day behind them and Rosie asleep, he was aware of her on the other side of the hearth with an acuteness that was new, or not new, but no longer something he was managing successfully. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you happy here?" he said. "Not, I do not mean settled or comfortable, I mean. Are you glad to be here?" She looked at the fire for a long time. Then she said, "I have been in a great many places in the past several years. I have not been glad to be in very many of them." She looked at him. "I am glad to be here." He nodded. He turned his mug in his hands. He said, "Good," and he meant a great deal more than the word. She looked at him for a moment longer, and then she said, "Clyde," in a tone that was careful and direct and slightly different from how she usually said his name, and he looked up and she said, "I know what you are doing with yourself." "What am I doing with myself?" he said. "You are being very careful," she said, "about everything." He was quiet. "I am doing the same thing," she said. "In case that is useful information." He held very still. "It is," he said. "Useful." "Good," she said, and she looked back at the fire. The first snow came the following week, a proper frontier snowfall that came overnight and buried the world up to the fence rails by morning. It was the kind of snow that makes a farm a siege. Everything needs tending before it freezes. The animals need extra feed. The water troughs need checking. And the work is done in cold that gets into the bones and makes it difficult to think about anything beyond the immediate physical task. They worked the day together, side by side through the drifts, feeding and checking and securing. By midday they were both deeply cold and soaked above the knee where the snow had come over their boots on the path to the root cellar, and Rosie was inside by the fire with instructions not to cause trouble, which she was probably interpreting creatively. Coming back from the barn in the late afternoon, the light already failing in that fast winter way, Clyde's boot broke through ice over a rut in the yard, and he lurched sideways with a curse. Urzoth caught him by the arm, both hands gripping above his elbow, her feet planted and steady, and he caught himself against her shoulder, and for a moment they were very close together in the cold and the failing light, her hands on his arm and his hand against her side, and their breath coming in visible clouds. She did not immediately step back. Neither did he. He looked up at her. She was a head taller, and this close the difference was a physical fact that he was very aware of, and her amber eyes were level and warm and very near his, and the cold was everywhere except where they were touching. "I have you," she said, very quietly. "I know," he said, equally quiet. She released his arm slowly. He stepped back. They walked the rest of the way to the door without speaking, and the silence between them was charged with something that was no longer deniable. That night after Rosie was in bed, Clyde sat at the table with his ledger open and not a single number written in it, and Urzoth sat across from him sewing a split seam in the shoulder of her cloak, and at some point they both looked up at the same time and held each other's eyes for long enough that looking away again felt like a decision. "Urzoth," he said. "Yes," she said. "I would like to," he started and then stopped because he was not sure how to say the thing he wanted to say without either saying too much or too little. She set down her sewing. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at him with complete attention. "I would like for you to stay," he said. Not in the way of a guest, in the way of he stopped again. He tried again. "I am not good at speeches," he said. "I know," she said. "You do not need to be." "I would like to know if you want this," he said, with a gesture that included the house and the fire and Rosie asleep above them and himself, all of it together. "If you want to be here." She was quiet for a moment that he felt in his whole chest. Then she said, "I have been asking myself the same question every morning for 2 weeks, whether this is a place I am borrowing or a place I am building." She paused. "I would like to stop asking." He reached across the table and put his hand flat on the wood, not reaching for hers, just putting it there in the open. And she looked at his hand, and then she put hers over it, and they sat like that for a long time with the fire going and the snow outside, and the house very quiet and warm. The first time he kissed her was 3 evenings later, and it was not planned. They were standing at the kitchen corner after dinner, him washing the pot and her putting things away on the high shelf. She was the only person in the house who could reach the high shelf without a stool, and she turned with an empty hand just as he turned to give her something, and they were suddenly face to face at close range, which, given the difference in their heights, meant his face was level with her throat, and she had to look down and he had to look up, and both of them started to say sorry and then stopped. He reached up and put his hand against her jaw because he could not think of anything else to do, and she went very still. Her eyes were warm and a little uncertain, which was the most exposed he had ever seen her face be, and it made him love her. He noticed the word in his own head and did not move away from it with a directness that was not complicated. He kissed her gently, and she was still for a breath, and then she kissed him back, and her hands came to his shoulders and steadied there, and the kiss was careful and warm and entirely true. When it ended, he kept his hand against her face, and she kept hers on his shoulders, and they stood in the small, honest aftermath of it and looked at each other. "All right," she said, which was not a particularly romantic thing to say, but she said it with a softness that made it perfect. "All right," he agreed. Rosie found out in the morning, because Rosie found out everything in the morning, and she found out by the specific telepathy that children have for changes in the emotional weather of the adults around them. She looked at both of them at breakfast with an expression of deep satisfaction, the look of someone whose long-term planning has come to fruition. "Good," she said, to no one in particular, and went back to her oat porridge. The winter deepened, and the homestead held its 3 people, and the days had the particular warmth of days that are hard and real and shared. There were bad days when the cold was punishing, and the work did not go right, and the weight of 2 years of single-handed farming sat on Clyde like a physical thing. And there were days when Rosie was impossible in ways that had no clear explanation. And there were days when Urzoth was quiet with a quality of quiet that meant something old was pressing on her. But they moved through all of it together, and the moving together was its own kind of anchor. He learned her by increments. He learned that she had been a healer in her settlement, that she knew plants and medicines with a specificity that went beyond folk knowledge into something systematic and deep. He learned that she had taught herself to read in a human trading language, because she had decided at 16 that the world would be easier to navigate if she could read the signs in it. He learned that she had been briefly hand-fasted to an orc warrior in her early 20s, that it had ended when he was killed in a border skirmish, and that she had not let herself be close to anyone in the way of love since then, because the loss had been severe enough that she had made a decision about her own heart without being fully aware she was making it. He told her things in return. About Ellen. About the years before Ellen, when he had drifted north from the lowland farms looking for a place that felt like it could hold him. about the land he had cleared and the house he had built mostly by himself in a single brutal summer, and how he had looked at it when it was done, and felt something that might have been pride but was mostly terror at how much he had staked. About Rosie being born in that house, in the deep of the following winter, with only a neighbor woman to help because they were too far from town for a midwife, and about holding his daughter for the first time with shaking hands, and knowing immediately that everything he had built was now for her. He told her these things in pieces, across many evenings, and she listened with the quality of attention she gave to everything completely, specifically, without performing sympathy. One night in what he calculated was the deepest of winter, a night when the cold was so sharp that even the fire-warmed house could not quite keep it entirely back. He woke to a sound he could not identify and lay still for a moment, and then understood that the sound was Rosie, on the other side of the curtain, making the small distressed sounds of a bad dream. He moved to go to her, but Urzoth, whose sleeping space was closer to Rosie's curtain, was already there, and he heard her low voice through the curtain, words he could not make out, and then Rosie's sounds gentled and went quiet, and there was the sound of the curtain rings on the rod. In the morning Rosie was fine, with no memory or interest in the night, and Urzoth did not mention it. But at breakfast Rosie reached across the table and patted Urzoth's hand with the compact, absolute confidence of a child who has decided something is simply true and does not need discussing. The spring thaw came with its usual assault on everything that had managed to hold together through the winter, and there were floods in the low field, and a section of the fence that had not survived, and a problem with the root cellar drainage that required a full day of digging in cold mud. But the light came back, and the frozen ground yielded, and the smell of the thawing world was something between relief and hope. In Millhaven, the thaw brought the first trading days of the new season, and the first trading day of the new season was when Clyde and Urzoth went to town together for the first time. He had gone twice over the winter alone, for necessary supplies, and both times had come back with reports of what was being said about the orc woman staying at the Ford homestead, which was roughly what you would expect in a small frontier town. Disapproval from some, open hostility from a few, and a pragmatic discomfort from the majority. Garrett Buell had made comments. The man named Harrow, who Rosie had called Uncle, had actually gone out of his way to stop Clyde on the trail and express concern for Rosie's welfare, which Clyde had received with a patience he did not entirely feel. Going to the Thursday market with Urzoth was therefore not a casual errand. He did not make a speech about it. He asked her if she wanted to come, because there were things she could help select seeds, specifically, certain plants she had said she could grow for food and medicine that he did not know how to identify without her, and she said yes, and they went. Rosie came, because Rosie always came. They drove into the market square with Urzoth on the bench beside him, and the ripple that moved through the Thursday crowd was different from the one that had moved through it in the winter. This time, people recognized her, and recognition produced a more complicated response than mere shock. There were fewer looks of pure alarm and more of the particular kind of cold stiffness that means we see you and we have decided what we think. Garrett Buell moved toward them before they had finished tying the horse. He had 2 men with him, which was a statement. "Ford," he said, "this is becoming a pattern." "Good morning, Garrett," Clyde said pleasantly. "The town committee has met," Garrett said. "There is a feeling that—" "I did not know Millhaven had a town committee," Clyde said. "That is new since last winter. The feeling is that a settlement of an orc on a homestead inside the township border. She is not settled inside the township border," Clyde said. "The Ford homestead is east of the border marker. You can ride out and look at the marker if you need." Garrett reddened. "You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean," Clyde said, and his voice was still pleasant, but something in it had shifted to iron. "And I will tell you as clearly as I can that who lives at my homestead is my business and not the business of a committee." He looked at the 2 men with Garrett. He recognized them both and met their eyes without apology. Now I have got a list of seeds to buy and rope to look at. Are we done? Garrett opened his mouth. And then from the level of Clyde's hip, Rosie said very loudly, "Mr. Buell, are you bothering my papa?" Because Urzoth says that when someone is bothering you, it is all right to say so directly. Garrett looked down at Rosie. Rosie looked up at him with the frank, fearless gaze of a child who is genuinely curious whether you have anything worth hearing. One of the men behind Garrett made a sound that might have been suppressed laughter. "We are not done," Garrett said to Clyde. "We are done for today," Clyde said. He put his hand on Rosie's shoulder and they walked past the three men, and Urzoth walked beside him, and she was very still and very contained in the way she had been at her first market visit. But this time, there was something different in her posture, less alone somehow. They bought the seeds and the rope, and a length of new canvas for the barn roof, and the chandler sold them lamp oil without any comments. An old prude in the dry goods shop gave them the hinge and said, without preamble, "It is good that Ford has help on that place." It was too much land for one man, and both Clyde and Urzoth registered the pragmatic pragmatism of this as the closest thing to welcome they were going to get from Millhaven, and accepted it as such. Walking back to the wagon, Urzoth said very quietly, "You did not have to do that." "You have said that to me before," he said. "It bears repeating," she said. "Urzoth," he said. He stopped at the wagon and looked up at her. "I would do it every week if I needed to." He paused. "And eventually they will get tired of it, and the thing they are arguing against will just be true, and they will find something else to argue about." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she put her hand against his face in a gesture that was a mirror of what he had done in the kitchen corner those weeks ago, and she said, "You are a good man, Clyde Ford." He put his hand over hers. "I am trying," he said. Rosie climbed up on the wagon bench and said, "Can we get peppermint sticks? Prute has them in the jar." They got peppermint sticks. Spring turned the farm into its most demanding season, and they threw themselves into it. Urzoth's knowledge of plants proved to be immediately, concretely valuable. She identified 3 places in the field where the soil had leached and needed amendment. She knew which wild plants along the timber edge could be dried for medicine, and which for flavoring and which were poisonous. And she started a herb garden on the south side of the house with a focus and specificity that produced, by midsummer, a dense and aromatic collection of growing things that made the air near the house different, richer, in a way that Rosie called the Urzoth smell, and that Clyde thought was one of the best things about coming home. The farm began to change. Not dramatically, but steadily, with the cumulative effect of a second pair of capable hands and an eye for systems, the way things connected, the way work could be organized to build on itself rather than repeat. By late spring they were keeping better records and working a rotation that made more sense than what he had been doing, and the animals were healthier, and the fence was solid, and there was a new cold frame against the south house wall for early seedlings that was Urzoth's design and build. He watched her build it and thought, with a certainty that surprised him with its completeness, that he wanted her to stay for the rest of his life. He sat with this knowledge for 2 weeks before he said anything, not because he was unsure, but because the thing was big and he wanted to hold it for a while before he brought it into the open. He said it on a June evening when the long light was still gold in the fields at 9 o'clock, and the air was warm and full of growing things, and they were sitting on the step of the house with the barn door open and the sounds of the animals settling for the night coming across the yard, and Rosie was inside on the verge of sleep. "I want to marry you," he said. Not as a question exactly, but he turned it at the end just enough to give her room. She was very still beside him. "Clyde." "I know what people will say," he said. "I know the town is half against it. I know your clan will not." He stopped himself. "None of that is what I am asking about. I am asking whether you want it." She was looking at the field, at the long gold light. Her profile was strong and clean against the evening sky, the tusks catching a little light, the braid falling forward over her shoulder. He had stopped seeing her the way Millhaven saw her a long time ago. He saw her the way you see someone when you have known them through winter and spring and the hard work of building something, when you have seen them laugh in a hay pile and soothe a child through a bad dream and stand in a hostile crowd with their chin up and their hands open. "There is no ceremony for this," she said finally. "Between our kinds, there is no tradition for it." "Then we make our own," he said. She turned her head and looked at him. "You understand what you are proposing." "I understand what I want," he said. She was quiet for a long time. The gold light moved across the field. An owl called from the timber. Then she said, "My people have a thing they call a pledge binding. It is simple. You say what you mean to be to each other. You bind your wrists with a cord. There does not need to be anyone watching." "I would like Rosie to watch," he said. Something crossed her face that was fully unguarded for the first time, something open and raw and luminous all at once. "Yes," she said. "I would like that too." "Then say yes," he said. She took a breath. "Yes," she said. He took her hand, there on the step, and held it, and they sat together in the long light while the gold faded slowly to indigo, and the night came up around them full of warmth and quiet, and the sounds of the farm they were building together. They held the pledge binding on a Sunday morning in July when the world was at its most generous, the meadow behind the house full of summer grass, and the light coming through a sky that was so blue it looked painted. Rosie wore her best dress and took the occasion with enormous seriousness, standing before both of them with a length of braided cord that Urzoth had made from 3 colors of fiber, holding it in both hands with the solemn importance of an official function. Clyde stood in his clean shirt and his second-best trousers and looked up at Urzoth in the morning light and felt the kind of certainty that does not make a man nervous because it is too solid for nerves. Urzoth stood with her cloak off, her leather bodice laced neatly, her black hair down from its braids for the first time. It fell to her shoulders, thick and dark, and the morning light made her amber eyes very clear. She looked at him with an expression that was everything she had learned to keep to herself, offered openly. "You say what you mean to be," she said softly to both of them and to Rosie. "I mean to be the person who is beside you," Clyde said. He had not written anything down. "In the good seasons and the hard ones, I mean to take what you give and give what I have. I mean to be the one who stands between you and the things that would hurt you every time I can." He paused. "And I mean to hear you. Whatever you need to say." She looked at him for a moment in the way she looked at important things. Then she said, "I mean to be the person who builds with you. Not on what was already here, but forward. I mean to bring what I know and learn what I do not know and to give this place and these people my whole heart." She stopped. "I have not given my whole heart to anything in a long time. I am giving it now." Rosie bound their wrists together, pressing the cord carefully around both and tying the end with the concentrated focus of someone performing a sacred duty. When she was done, she looked at both of them and said, "Now you are married." "Now we are married," Clyde said. Rosie considered this. "Can we have the pie now?" There was a pie. He had made it the night before, apple with dried blackberry, the best thing he knew how to bake, and he had hidden it in the cold cellar. They ate it at the table outside in the July sun, all 3 of them, and the morning was enormous and simple and exactly what all of them needed. What followed was not a fairy story. It was a life, a real one with the texture and resistance of real things. They filed a legal registry at the Millhaven land office in August, adding Urzoth's name to the homestead deed, which took 3 trips to the office because the land officer kept finding administrative reasons to delay, until Clyde sat across the desk from him and said, very quietly, that he understood the law better than the officer seemed to and would be happy to bring it up with the regional magistrate, at which point the deed was amended and the stamp applied. This was the victory that nobody made a speech about, but it was the one that mattered most practically, because it meant the land was hers as much as his, and no one could take that from her. In Millhaven, opinion continued to be divided. Garrett Buell remained hostile and became increasingly irrelevant, because the Ford homestead's output that first full season they worked together was significantly better than it had been, and the quality of the herb medicines Urzoth sold at market quietly, from a basket, without a stall, because that was a battle still to be fought was noted by those who tried them. And the people who had been ill and been helped by those medicines were not the same people as those prepared to carry Garrett's water. Old Prute at the dry goods store began nodding at Urzoth when she came in. The chandler began directing her to the good stock without waiting for Clyde to ask. A woman named Sira, the wife of one of the outlying farmers, came to the homestead one September morning with a sick child, and a look on her face that mixed desperation and embarrassment in approximately equal parts, because she was one of the people who had stepped back from Urzoth in the market, and she knew it, and was coming anyway because the child was sick and Urzoth was the best herbalist in the Fork country. Urzoth brought the child inside, examined him with the same focused care she gave everything, and mixed a compound of dried willow bark and feverfew and two other things that she did not name for Sira, because the names would not have meant anything, and told Sira how to administer it and what to watch for. The child was better in 3 days. Sira came back the following Thursday with a jar of preserves and an awkward directness, and said she was sorry for having been foolish. Urzoth received this with more grace than it deserved, and said she was welcome back any time. Clyde heard about this from Rosie, who had witnessed it and reported every detail with the accuracy and emphasis of a natural journalist. He found Urzoth at the herb garden after and told her he was proud of her, and she said she was not particularly interested in being gracious to someone who had been unkind, but that the child was not to blame for his mother's small-mindedness, and that was that. He loved her terribly when she was pragmatic like that. The autumn came in hard, with early frosts and a north wind that reminded the homestead of what was coming, and they laid in the harvest and the firewood and the preserved goods with a competence that came from two people who had now been doing this together long enough to move around each other without needing words. The barn roof with its new canvas was sound. The fence was solid. The root cellar was full. One night in October, when Rosie had been asleep for an hour, and the fire had settled to red coals, and the house was very quiet and very warm, they lay together for the first time with the full weight of everything they were to each other. The loft had always been an in-between place. She had her curtained section and he had his, but this night the curtain was simply not there, because they had both decided it was not necessary without saying so. It was gentle and slow and deeply tender, the kind of closeness that happens between people who have been learning each other for months and are finally saying the thing without words. She was warm and solid and present in a way that made the world narrow to the right size, and he held her with his whole self, and she held him back, and there was nothing in it that was not real. It was not a beginning, they had been beginning for a long time, but it was an arrival, and they both felt it as such. Afterward, in the dark and the warmth, she lay with her head at a height that put his face in her shoulder, which was a physical logistics they had worked out with some laughter earlier, and he said into the dark, "I meant what I said in the meadow." "I know," she said. Her hand was in his hair. "So did I, every word of it," he said. "Every word," she said. They slept with the cold outside the walls and the warmth between them, and the house held all of it the way a good house holds things, quietly, faithfully, without comment. The following spring, in the late afternoon of a warming April day, Urzoth told him she was carrying their child. She told him in the barn where they had been checking on the horse, and she said it directly, the way she said everything important, looking at him with those amber eyes and saying the thing plainly, watching his face. His face did a number of things in rapid succession that he was not in control of. He put his hands over hers and held them and said, "Are you all right?" "I am very well," she said. "This is—" He stopped. He was not able to complete the sentence with any precision. He laughed instead, a short and helpless laugh, and she looked startled and then smiled the full smile, the one that transformed her face into something incandescent, and he put his arms around her and she bent her head down and pressed her face into his hair. "I am going to need a larger door on the loft," he said, into her shoulder. She laughed, and it rumbled in her chest against his ear. Rosie took the news with the equanimity of a 6-year-old, who has already decided that she approves of every decision her father has made since November and sees no reason to change that policy. She did ask, with genuine scientific curiosity, whether the baby would be green, and when Clyde said probably somewhat green, she nodded as if this confirmed something she had already calculated. "I want a brother," she said. "That is not entirely our decision," Clyde said. "It should be," Rosie said. The pregnancy was not without its complications. Urzoth carried larger than a human woman, which was expected, and certain of the frontier medicines were uncertain in their safety, and they had no midwife in the Fork country who had experience with an orc birth. What they had was Urzoth's own substantial knowledge, and the practical wisdom of a woman who had been a healer in a community that had no one else to be. She was calm about all of it in a way that was either genuine or performed so well that it amounted to the same thing. In the third month, there was a week when she was very tired and something was not right, and Clyde spent 5 days in a particular kind of fear that he kept to himself, because he did not want to add to her burden, and because being afraid in front of Rosie was not something he allowed himself. On the 6th day, Urzoth looked at him across the table and said, "You can be frightened. It is all right." "I know," he said, and he said so, and she put her hand on his and they sat in the fear together for a while, which made it smaller. The problem resolved. The rest of the pregnancy was steady. In the November of the 2nd year of their marriage deep winter, the world locked in the iron cold. Their son was born in the house they had built together, in the bedroom they shared, with a woman from the Saddler's Creek settlement who had experience in orc births, and who Urzoth had arranged through Merton Glace 6 months in advance. He was born at dawn, gray-green skinned and loud and enormous, with his mother's amber eyes and his father's stubbornly dark blonde fuzz on his enormous head. Rosie, who had been told to wait downstairs and had lasted approximately 4 minutes before appearing at the top of the loft ladder, saw him first after Clyde and said, in the tone of a person whose specifications have been met, "Good, a brother." They named him Darren. Darren Ironhide Ford, because she would not let the Ironhide go and he would not have asked her to. He was loud and enormous and ate everything in reach, and had his mother's absolute composure and his father's particular stubbornness about everything, and he had the effect of making the homestead feel permanently, completely full in the way that is the best kind of full. Life went on and it was good. In the spring after Darren's birth, they finally got the market stall. Urzoth's herbs and medicines and the dried provisions they had been selling from a basket were enough of a Millhaven staple by that point that turning it into a proper stall with a sign was more a formality than a fight. The sign said Ford and Ironhide, which was a decision that made Garrett Buell visibly unhappy and which caused old Prout, who was standing outside his shop when they put it up, to nod once with the particular deliberate approval of a man who does not say things loudly but means them. Sierra, the farmer's wife with the recovered child, had by this point become someone they saw regularly, and who no longer had anything to apologize for because she had been demonstrating her opinions with actions for a year. She bought herbs every Thursday and she brought other people to buy herbs, and she was, without having declared herself such, an advocate in the particular frontier way, not speeches, just loyalty expressed through regular commerce and the willingness to look unfriendly people in the eye. The year Darren turned 3, there was trouble, not from Millhaven this time, from the north. 2 men rode into the homestead yard on an afternoon in late summer, orc men, large and armored in the war-marking style of the Ironhide clan, bearing the elder's mark on their bracers. Clyde was in the barn when he heard the horse sounds and came out to find them stopped in the yard with Urzoth standing in the doorway of the house. She had gone still in a particular way. He had learned all of her stillnesses, and this one was the one that meant she recognized the threat. He walked from the barn to stand beside her in the doorway, which he did without hurrying, so it was clear it was a choice. The older of the two men looked at him with the contempt that some orcs had for humans in the same way some humans had for orcs, the contempt of someone who has decided what you are before arriving. "This does not concern you," the man said, in accented but clear frontier common. "Everything at this homestead concerns me," Clyde said. "We have a message for Urzoth Ironhide," the man said, "from the elder." "I am here," Urzoth said. "Say it." "The elder extends an offer of return," the man said. "The settlement was rebuilt after the conflict. There is a place for a healer. The terms are no," Urzoth said. A pause. The man looked at her. "You have not heard the terms." "I do not need to," she said. "I left. I built a life. I will not unmake it." The man's eyes moved to Clyde, then to Rosie, who had appeared in the doorway behind her stepmother with Darren on her hip, because she had decided to see what was happening. "You have human-bound yourself," he said to Urzoth, in a tone that named it as a failure. "I have chosen my family," she said. "That is not the elder's business." "You carry the Ironhide name," the man said. "I carry it on my land deed," she said. "I carry it on the sign at Millhaven Market. I carry it on my son, who is Darren Ironhide Ford, and when he is grown he will carry it himself, and it will mean something different than what the elder made it mean. That is not your concern either." The older man looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Clyde again, and something shifted in his expression, not acceptance, but a recalculation. "The elder will not extend this offer again," he said. "I know," she said. "Good day." The two men turned their horses and rode north without another word. Rosie appeared at Urzoth's elbow. "Who were those men? People from a part of my life that is finished," Urzoth said. "They did not seem friendly," Rosie said. "They were not," Urzoth agreed. "But you were not afraid of them," Rosie said with satisfaction. "No," Urzoth said. Then, more quietly, "because I did not have to face them alone." She looked at Clyde. He looked back. Darren, unimpressed by the entire episode, demanded to be put down so he could chase the chickens, and Rosie put him down, and he waddled into the yard at speed, and the afternoon went on. That evening, after the children were in bed, Urzoth sat at the table with her hands flat on the wood and said, "That is over." "Yes," he said. "I have been waiting for something like that for 2 years," she said. "Some consequence from the clan, some reclamation." She looked at her hands. "It was smaller than I thought it would be." "Things usually are," he said, "once they arrive." She looked up at him. "I was afraid you would feel." She stopped. "What?" "That it was too much," she said. "The orc life pressing in against the human life you built. That at some point the weight of it would—" "Urzoth," he said. He came around the table and sat beside her, not across from her, and put his hand on the table next to hers so she could take it if she wanted. She did. "I knew what I was building when I built it. I knew who I was building it with. None of that surprised me." "The clan men at your gate might have surprised some men," she said. "I have had debt collectors at my gate," he said. "And Garrett Buell twice. Clan riders are more intimidating, but the principle is the same. You stand in your doorway and you tell them no." She gripped his hand. "Thank you," she said. "Always," he said. "The years built on themselves the way the good years do, not without hardship, but with the accumulation of all the things that survive it." Rosie grew into a girl who was startlingly, unmistakably her father's daughter in her stubbornness and her directness, and equally her stepmother's in her capability and her thoroughness. And she had the run of the homestead with a competence by the time she was 10 that would have impressed anyone who watched her work. She was not a soft child, but she was a generous one. She shared her stepmother's knowledge of plants with absolute fairness. She defended Darren against any child at market who said anything unkind about his color or his tusks, and she had the quality that some people are born with and some people learn. The quality of knowing when someone needs company and when they need space. Darren grew into a boy who was built like his mother, and cheerful like his father, and curious about everything, with a particular fixation on animals that led eventually to a claim that the chickens were his personal concern and should not be arranged without his input. He was green-gray skinned with his father's features organized slightly differently, his mother's amber eyes, and 2 small tusks that were his father's particular point of pride, because Clyde thought they were remarkable and said so freely, which meant Darren grew up thinking his tusks were remarkable without having to be told. This was not a small thing in the world they were living in. He also grew up being the child of Urzoth Ironhide and Clyde Ford, which in the Fork country meant something specific by the time he was old enough to understand it. It meant the Ironhide Ford homestead, which was what people had started calling it. It meant the market stall with both names on the sign. It meant that his mother was the best herbalist in 3 settlements, and his father was a man whose word was worth something. And that together, they had built a place that held people when it needed to 3 winters in which the homestead had provided work or shelter or both to families that had hit hard times. One of whom was a family from Saddler's Creek, who had lost their barn in a fire, and who spent 2 months in the Ford loft while they rebuilt. Millhaven changed slowly, as small frontier towns change, not by declaration but by the slow adjustment of what people saw every day. You cannot watch 2 capable, decent people build something good for 10 years and not have it register in some way. Garrett Buell moved his feed business east to a different settlement and was not missed. The land officer who had stalled the deed amendment retired and was replaced by a younger man who had grown up in a town further north where orc and human trade relations were old enough to be unremarkable. Old Prout died and left the dry goods shop to his nephew, who was 24 and had no strong feelings about anything except stock management and the importance of the spring seed order. Sierra's daughter, who was 8 when her brother had been sick and Urzoth had treated him, grew up and came to the Ford homestead at 14 to apprentice in herbal medicine. Urzoth taught her for 3 years with the same rigor and care she brought to everything, and when the girl set up her own small practice in Millhaven, she was careful to tell every patient where she had learned and who had taught her. One morning, in the late summer of a year when Rosie was 19, and thinking about the settlement further north where a young man she had met at market was from, and Darren was 12 and in possession of opinions about everything, Clyde came out onto the step of the house in the early light and found Urzoth already there, sitting with a mug of something warm, looking out at the fields. The fields were green and full and well-fenced, the barn sound behind them, the herb garden a dense and fragrant thing against the south wall, the smokehouse with its long fixed hinge closed and solid. The morning light was coming across the eastern field the way it did in late summer, golden and long and clear. He sat down beside her close and she leaned slightly against his shoulder, which she did in the mornings when she thought no one was watching. "What are you thinking?" he said. "That it is a good place," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She was quiet for a moment. "When I walked into that market," she said, "I was not looking for any of this." "I know," he said. "I was looking for lamp oil," she said. "And a way forward that did not involve the garrison." "You found better than that," he said. She looked at him sideways with those amber eyes. "Much better," she said. He took her hand. She led him and turned her hand so their fingers were laced together, and they sat in the morning light while the farm woke up around them, the chickens, the horse in its pasture, Darren's voice inside demanding to know if breakfast was ready, a door. "Rosie is going north," he said. "I know," she said. "She told me before she told you." "Of course she did," he said without any particular hurt. "It was the right order." "I told her to go with her eyes open," Urzoth said. "And to come back when she needed to. And to not let anyone make her feel that her wanting something means she is less than herself." "Good advice," he said. "I had to learn it," she said. He squeezed her hand. "Did you?" She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "From a man who left a lamp in a window." He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "It seemed like the right thing to do." "It was," she said. Rosie left in the autumn with her pack and her horse and the company of a wagon going north, and the house was quieter without her, though Darren did his best to fill the volume deficit. She wrote letters carefully, in the handwriting Urzoth had improved by sitting beside her with a pen and unforgiving patience, and came home for the winter solstice and stayed 3 weeks, and was so completely herself, so thoroughly and irreducibly Rosie Ford, that both her parents could not stop being pleased by her even when she was infuriating. She married the young man the following year, in a ceremony in the meadow behind the homestead because she insisted on it, and the meadow held her and her new husband and both their families, and more of the Fork country settlement than anyone had organized in one place before. And it was clear, looking at the crowd that had come, that the Ironhide Ford homestead had become the kind of place where people gathered because gathering there felt like something worth doing. Urzoth stood in the meadow in a new dress that Rosie had helped her choose for the occasion, deep green linen, cut close and belted with the same style of cinched leather that she had always favored, and watched her stepdaughter Mary with an expression that was entirely unguarded and entirely luminous. Clyde stood beside her with his hand in hers and watched both of them and felt something that was larger than happiness and quieter than it, too, something like the feeling of having arrived somewhere that you did not know you were walking toward. 2 years after Rosie's wedding, Urzoth and Clyde had their second child together. A daughter this time, small and green and loud, with Clyde's dark blonde fuzz and Urzoth's amber eyes and the kind of determined presence that suggests from the very first moment that she is going to have opinions about everything and will not be keeping them to herself. They named her Ellen Ironhide Ford, and she slept in the same curtained loft corner that Rosie had slept in. And Darren, who was 14 by then and had declared himself profoundly disinterested in babies, spent 3 consecutive evenings sitting next to the cradle watching her sleep with an expression that he would have strenuously denied was tender. The morning after Ellen came home to the house, Clyde carried her to the east window and let the early light fall across her face, which was the thing he had done with Darren and with Rosie before that, because first light on a new face was something he believed in. Urzoth was sitting up in bed watching him do this. She looked comfortable and tired and radiant and very much herself. "She has your frown," Clyde said. "She has not yet decided what to do with it," Urzoth said. "She will figure it out," he said. He brought the baby back and sat on the edge of the bed and gave her to Urzoth, and Urzoth received her daughter with the arms that had fixed fence posts and planed doors and bent iron at the forge and soothed sick children and been held by him in the dark, and held her easily and completely. "We did this," Urzoth said quietly. "We did," he said. She looked at him over the baby's head. "Clyde, I want you to know," she stopped, in the way she rarely stopped, the way that meant she was choosing words for something that mattered. "I want you to know that I was right when I said I was giving you my whole heart. In the meadow, I was right and I have not taken it back and I do not plan to." He put his hand on hers. "I know," he said. "Neither have I," she nodded. Her eyes were bright. She looked down at Ellen, who had found her fist and was deeply engaged with it. "Good," Urzoth said. Outside, the summer morning was coming in over the east field, all that long golden light across the grass and the well-fenced land and the full root cellar and the sound herb garden and the barn with its good roof. The horse was in its pasture. Darren was downstairs making noise in the kitchen in his particular morning style that suggested someone had built a kitchen and put a young boy in it and told him no one was watching. The homestead breathed around them, wide awake and alive. Everything they had made out of a winter market, and a lamp in a window, and a little girl who had held her hand out to a stranger without fear was here, fully built, fully real. The Ironhide Ford homestead stood on its cleared land in the Fork country, and it would stand for a long time after this morning. And the people who had built it would grow old in it together, and the children who had been born in it and brought into it would carry it forward in the particular way that things are carried forward when they are made of love instead of just lumber. Clyde Ford looked at his wife and his daughter and the golden morning through the window, and he was, in the deepest and most honest sense of the word, at home. Urzoth Ironhide looked at him, looking at all of it, and she smiled the full, luminous, unguarded smile, and the room held that smile the way a good house holds warmth, quietly, faithfully, without comment. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.